You're listening to Frontier Matters, the podcast from 1914 Reader. Join us as we dive into bold conversations on growth and change in the frontier economies of the world.
Hello and welcome back to Frontier Matters with myself and Toby. We should say Happy New Year. This is our first time, or this is the first time you're hearing our voice this year where we're recording a solo episode of the podcast. Toby and I decided that we will get together, just ramble through a few points on quote-unquote matters arising. Today we want to talk about maybe three things in general. We want to talk about Detty December, taxation, and globalization, all the things that are happening. Obviously, Nigeria does not exist in a vacuum. We want to talk about those things as well and how it impacts Nigeria. So hopefully you stay with us to the end and enjoy the episode. Welcome, Toby.
Yeah, Faye, thanks. And Happy New Year to our listeners everywhere.
Cool. Okay.
So, what I would obviously we've been talking about this for a while. And I think that's where I want us to start, Detty December. It's become an annual thing. Looks like it's here to stay. But a few, cracks are started showing. And you wrote about this in December, where you talked about the arbitrage. For people who probably didn't read the article, do a brief catch up and then we discuss some of the salient points.
Yeah, so I think for me, the point of the article was kind of say, okay, so the first big year of Detty December was 2023, and this was the year when Tinubu was elected as president and we had the massive devaluation. All of a sudden, that year, the sentiment was people finding Nigeria to be a cheap destination. And this is there's nothing bad about this. This is the appeal of Thailand, for example. If you've been to Thailand, you discover that if you go there, I remember the first time I went to Thailand, I went with my family, 20 pounds felt like an amazing amount of money because we would eat and eat and eat. Just four of us would eat for 20 pounds and we'll still have the equivalent of 20 pounds and still have change left. And this is the appeal of Thailand, a beautiful country, the vistas and the scenery is just amazing. They have amazing hotels, but actually it also felt like real value for money, especially if you're coming from Europe, so that's not a bad thing. But that 2023, that was definitely the sentiment that, I heard stories and jokes on people who said, they went to Nigeria with only £100 and they were able to have an incredible time. People said they showed up with $200, that sort of thing. You went out and partied and all of that. So, that was a moment where Nigeria was competitively priced for quote unquote an export product. And, we talk about this all the time here. If Nigeria is going to become an export economy, the long and short of it is that you just have to do things better than what someone else is already doing and make yourself an option on the global scale. So, there's almost nothing that is being sold or manufactured globally right now that is not being done somewhere already. But it doesn't mean that, just because somebody is doing something that you should never do it. You can do it, but by innovating, making it better, or making it cheaper, making it more efficient. Those are all the ways we could play. So, it's not like people did not have where they could go on holidays in December before 2023, but all of a sudden Nigeria showed up aggressively, became an option, in part because of the devaluation and the party scene in Lagos. So that was the overriding sentiment in 2023. But then fast forward to 2025, and it was almost like things had gone full circle in the sense that everyone was now complaining. So many complaints were about costs. Price of things, cost of accommodation, cost of transportation, cost of restaurant, all that kind of thing. And I thought, this is quite a turnaround in just 2 years. So we couldn't even enjoy this thing for 5-10 years before inflation and natural things catch up, So I think Nigeria the whole Detty December thing got to an inflection point in this last December. There'll always be Detty December, no doubt about it, Nigerians in Nigeria will treat December as a kind of like holiday and festive period. But from the point of it being an export product that can draw people from outside of Nigeria to the country, it looked like December 2012 was a critical moment. It could be lost, if things continue to happen as they do. So that was just generally my thoughts about it. And I hope people are sort of like thinking about this, from the point of view of sustainability, because this thing is, again, an export product, right? If it brings more demand, more payments into Nigeria, more business and all that, that can never be a bad thing. People come into the country, they spend money in December, people can make a lot of money, that sort of thing for that in that time period. And if that goes away, then it will be a real shame, to put it mildly.
And I mean, like you rightly pointed out, one the most profound point for me in that essay was the cost advantage, because this is like at the heart of economics of tourism, right? People want to have fun, but at the same time they want to have fun on a budget. It's one of the top reasons that people go anywhere. I recall during the Eurozone crisis, and Greece, sorry, was really, really feeling the heat. And it was a tourism dependent economy. And one of the huge barriers to policy response then was the fact that it does not have a national currency. So devaluation was not even on the table as a response. And I mean, a significant portion of the value of the tourism industry was going to Turkey at the time. But I mean, speaking of the economics of tourism, so there are 3 points I want to get your thoughts on. How much of it do you think is due to domestic inflation, in the sense that it's not that Nigeria's national economy is productive, such that output is constantly expanding, say over a year? This might just be a case of pure supply and demand, and prices responding to that pressure. Also, there is the cultural element. I recall that the year before, there were so many complaints about people getting back to the UK, canceling their cards, and filing some charges as fraudulent for the credit card company or the banks to reclaim those payments. So how much of this do you also think is like a cultural response to what you would say that Nigerians gaming Nigerians, sort of?
Yeah. So yeah, that's go on, sorry.
Yeah. So, and so I mean, those 2 points. Let me get your thoughts.
Okay. So I think the good question in terms of inflation, I think that rather than it being inflation per se, I think that it's the drivers of inflation. The things that drive inflation in Nigeria are the same drivers that are shooting up costs, right? So this is almost kind of like a structural problem with Nigeria. And the way I like to think about it is capacity constraints, right? It is just so very difficult for capacity to expand in Nigeria to meet any kind of demand. It is very, very, and I think the best way I can illustrate it is by a story that a friend told me. So a friend who went to Nigeria for Detty December, right? And he said they did a car hire, and forgive me if maybe I've gotten the numbers wrong, but I think he said something like they had a car hire and it was maybe about 300,000 a day, right? And it was obviously very expensive, but they needed to do it. And he said the driver was telling them that in normal times, right? This is so obviously non-Detty December period. The car hire is about 60,000 a day or something like that. But basically, it was 5x for Detty December. Now, when you think about it, this is a capacity constraint, right? So the whole idea is not that we should put more cars on the road to meet the demand of Detty December. It was so basically, let's say the guy has 10 cars for non-Detty December period, January to November, right? 10 cars. It goes into December with those same cars, with those same number of cars, those same 10 cars, and then 5x is the price, right? So it is not a question, and you can see this everywhere, right? You look at the airports, again, it's not like the Nigerian airports has so many flights, right? I mean, the number of flights from the UK to Dubai in a day is probably what Nigeria gets in the whole day, and I probably not even that many, or the number of flights to New York, for example. I mean, so I know from the UK to New York, we maybe do something like, say, close to 30 flights a day to New York. Nigeria's airport does not get 30 flights a day. I don't think so. I mean, nowhere close to that. So, the capacity constraint is the same thing. So all of a sudden it's not like it's more flights per se, it's just more people showing up in December, and the airport looks like chaos, right? Or there's traffic on the roads. It is not like anybody said, oh, we'll put more last mile officials on the road, or Lagos State did anything particularly to increase capacity, just to make it as, okay, we're going to get more people. So, on normal days, this is the amount of cars that drives here. We think that in December, with Detty December, maybe will go up by 2 or 3 times. So let's, increase capacity in terms of traffic management. No, all of that was just basically, the same supply available, and then demand went up by 2x, 3x. And, again, you look at it, the hotels, Airbnbs, all the same thing. Price just goes up. So we have a serious problem of hitting these hard capacity constraints in anything. And it's the same thing with local inflation. So you look at food inflation, for example, it's the same amount of rice or stuff being produced, corn, whatever, which means that, for example, when you get, the newsletter last week, I was talking about Tuta absoluta, which is a pest that
Yeah.
constantly attacks Nigerian tomatoes almost every other year. So, there is, again, that capacity constraint there. So the guarantee you get from that is that tomato prices will spike. Or farmers planting maybe onions or something this year, and then they realize that there's a cash crop that's going to give them a bit more money so they move to that one, and then the price of that thing spikes and all of that. So, all of these things, these are the almost kind of like the structural constraints that we face in locally without Detty December. Things like irrigation, there's actually no increase in irrigation per se for Nigerian farming, no increase in number of extension workers per se, and all of that. So any demand increase, it just translates immediately into a price increase. And you saw this. So this is almost kind of like the same thing you saw with that. The drivers of inflation locally are the same thing driving that. And I don't know if it might be extending the argument too much, but this is where, how much are the elite or the Nigerian elite, how much are they investing in the country, in the sense of, making investments to boost capacity, to boost, this capacity, to fight this capacity constraints. And, people might say, why should anybody invest for just December or something?
I was going to come to that point.
But actually, I live in the UK here, and I can tell you that I know several businesses who only do business for maybe 2 or 3 months a year. Right. I met a guy recently, well, not recently, but around last summer, and we were talking about his business. So we were having an event at my kid's school, and it was a summer barbecue event. So I was making barbecue, and then he brought drinks, and he brought this drinks truck. It didn't look really snazzy type of truck where, he had every kind of drink in it and icing and all that. Very nice looking thing. And so I was talking to him, and I was asking him that, but this thing that, obviously your business is concentrated in the summer, right? So what do you do? He said, well, yeah, that's it. That business for them is 3 months of a year. There is literally nothing happen for the remaining 9 months of the year, but they make it work. And I was like, yeah, you make it work. They have staff, they pay staff. Yeah, obviously he has a family and all of that. He has to earn money. It was like, the only part that changes is that in the summer periods, maybe they hire some flexible contract staff to meet additional demand. But, the business is a 3-month business. And there are several businesses like that. There are businesses that, 90% of their earnings come from the Christmas period. So they plan for this and all of that. So it's not impossible to actually have seasonal businesses that, so maybe people are afraid to invest and say, what if I invest for only Detty December?
Yeah.
And then what happens for the rest of the year?
Yeah. I want to say that maybe also that goes into the price spikes we are seeing. So like a lot of there's a lot of concepts here we can lump into one, which is, for example, there's the time inconsistency problem. Like, let's say you're a hairdresser or something, and based on the number of businesses you the value of business you did in December last year, you went ahead and increased capacity. Maybe you got a bigger shop, add more apprentices or helps, whatever. But you then have to bear the cost of that expansion for a whole year, right? And when December comes, you're trying to price that into your services. And I think maybe that might also be true for a lot of the real estate investments that people make based on the demand around that period. And, we might be seeing some time inconsistency and price discrimination going on. But to your point, as for the capacity constraints and investment generally, how much do you think the absence of local demand? I mean, we can't say that for food. There's obviously demand for food. Because I think maybe when we have a Fosa on the show, we'll dig into this point more about market creation, because sometimes demand is different from a market. The fact that you have a demand for something doesn't mean you have a market for it. The fact that Nigeria is a big country, but a very small market.
Yeah.
How much do you think that affects like the investment decisions that people make? Because I mean, you're spending money and you expect some returns, and if you figure, well, this is just around December, so maybe it's not worth it.
Well, to be honest, I think it's more a cultural, I don't want to say maybe it's a problem, or maybe a cultural disavowal of exports. Again, like I said, this is something we complain about on 1940 Reader all the time, right? Nigeria is nowhere near, even scratching the surface of its export potential, right? We don't export anything, practically beyond crude oil. So Nigeria, and this problem is across. And when you think about it, tourism is an export product, right? So if you are going to invest, you are really not investing for the Nigerian market. Yes, you can. I remember a hotel owner in Nigeria, he was mentioning to me that they did a hotel upgrade. So one of the hotels on the island, they bought a hotel and then they upgraded it and, nicely and all that. But he said when they were actually doing the target was obviously foreign visitors to Nigeria, so, businessmen, expats, all that kind of stuff, and that was what they were targeting out. But that a pleasant surprise was that they started seeing people who live in, say, maybe Lekki, or even somewhere within VI and Ikoyi, will just come and stay in the hotel with their children for the weekend. Like, initially, they didn't understand it. So when they started seeing that this was becoming a thing, and these people, part of the thing that they wanted was kind of like the pool, then they started having to create kids' activities, right? So they hired kids party type thing and all of that to put on kids activities for people who were coming on the weekend. So that was a pleasant surprise that came. But it's not obviously that's not a large market, but where you see just people who leave their house in that same Lagos, just a few miles away, and just come and stay in a hotel for the weekend and maybe just get away, relax and all of that. So they start putting on. But in most cases, you wouldn't build a hotel for that and say, oh, I want to build a hotel in VI to cater for people, who are coming from a few miles away just to come and spend the weekend. That would be quite tricky. So it's a side thing, and that kind of internal demand would not be the way I would approach, or anyone should approach, tourism. So I think the problem is just not that lack of, I'm trying to think of how to call it. Maybe it's a lack of know-how, or a lack of, a know-how of actually being an export economy. So we've not done it, right? We don't know how to do it because we've not done it. We've never really been an export. Whatever has been export for Nigeria is crude oil, right? We've not actually made products and then exported it. And once you start to export things, you get a sense of how these things work. And look, Nigeria will not be the first, right? I've been to many places, same places in the world where, again, the business is for a period in the year, right, time period of the year. So in the UK, for example, people travel a lot. They go on holidays a lot. So where people go in the summer, Spain, Turkey, and the likes, is very, very different from where they go in the winter because they are looking for sun. So as as December approaches, people start to go to places like Dubai or the Canary Islands and all that sort of thing. And those places, they get they build around that. There was a guy. There was a time I went to Spain with my family, and there was a guy. We had a boat run just to go and do just a kind of like a boat ride and all that. And this was in August. So the guy was like, he was not joking when I was saying, oh, that the Germans have come, the French have come. You guys are actually sort of like the British. That you guys are sort of like, and after this week, once you guys have gone, I'm wrapping up for the year, and I'll probably maybe go on holiday or something. But these 3 months is his whole business. So July, August, June, July, August, that's when his whole business. And he was quite methodical about it, saying that, oh, the Italians come at this time, the Germans come at this time, the French come at this time, and the British come at this time. And he structures his business like that. He said, and once the end of August has come, so that is an export business, right? You structure around that, how to cater for that. So I think it's more a lack of know-how in the sense that we just don't have that know-how or the skill to cater to produce products for the export. And Detty December fell in our laps, and we've struggled, like it landed on the country's lap, especially that boost in 2023. And the country does not seem to know how to respond and say, oh, okay, now that you've captured a slice of the global market, here's how you go about sustaining it. Here is where we should be investing in capacity to meet this thing, just to maintain that price competitiveness, which is drawing in people, and don't drive people away by, hitting capacity constraints that then just spike prices up.
And I mean, on that point, I was reading a paper recently by I forgot his name now. The original collaborator with Ricardo Hausman on the economic
Yeah, I can
complexity.
remember. I forget his name now, but I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and basically what the paper was saying that I mean, it's scary to think about it if we think about Nigeria's situation. Basically, the theory that is propounding with his co-authors is that your chances of reaching high capacity if you're starting from a very low capability point is difficult, is hard, almost impossible. And when I think about Nigeria and the fact that, yes, we talk about export diversification away from crude oil in name and how we've just been flailing and there is no coherence and the rank incompetence you see in governance, it's scary. But I want to pivot on this subject before we move on to the public side. I mean, we talked about the private side in terms of investment. Lagos state sucks, like really, because you leaned into the Detty December thing and advertised for a whole year. And I mean, people came here and it was still the same complaint. Spending hours in traffic, bad infrastructure, the city is not really clean. And I really don't know. I wish at some point we'll have a governor or a commissioner on the show to really talk about what is going on in subnational governance because I don't understand anymore. And for example, on the traffic thing, which speaks to what I want to ask you on our lack of state capacity. Like, how do you explain it? In the sense that I drive in Lagos all the time. And I know that people can come up with all kinds of fancy solutions to the traffic problems. Some people will say congestion pricing, this, that. But if you drive in Lagos, you know for a fact that there is a basic governance and enforcement element to it. If you drive as limited and as small as the infrastructure is, I mean, relative to the population, something as simple as lane discipline, traffic officers in Lagos cannot enforce them. Like public yellow buses, they can park anywhere to pick up passengers and, drop off passengers. They can park anywhere, even on major arteries and major roads. And before you know it, in 5 minutes, what looked like free moving traffic becomes congested instantly. And you have cases like that all over the city. But here you advertise that Lagos is open for business, Detty December, blah, 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 for a whole year. And still nothing changed. The airport was congested, the roads were congested. Everybody complained about the same thing about Lagos that they did last year. I don't know. Is it an incentive problem? Is it an incompetence problem? I can't say I understand anymore at this point.
Yeah, it's. I think it's a bit of both, but actually, I think the incentives are a big. I mean, personally, right? If I was advising somebody campaigning for governor of Lagos or even running for governor of Lagos, I would try and make the whole argument about quality of life, right? So, quality of life as a target for governance in Lagos, right? Just making life better for people there. So, forget about any fancy type thing. You can still do all of that, but actually across the board, what are the ways in which we can improve the quality of life? And this is things like how much time is spent in traffic, public spaces that are protected for everyone, safety, that sort of thing. So because now, I mean, we also the embarrassment of the videos from iShow Speed and all of that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but I think what the part that really got me was when he then went to Benin Republic and the contrast, right? So he went to a public park and people looked at that public park and they said, look, if you had this in Lagos, it will be immediately overrun by area boys and they will start harassing people and charging that sort of thing. So it is almost impossible to have a public space in Lagos now that actually does what a public space does, which is basically, your enjoyment of it does not limit my enjoyment of it, right? So both of us can use that public space without you harassing me or me harassing you, that sort of thing. And that's what public spaces are, parks, all this kind of thing. Unfortunately, it has become a menace, the whole area boy thing and, basically able-bodied men with nothing to do, nothing but time on their hands. Seeing, you have a whole, what somebody once called the area boy economy, right? Essentially, the area boy economy is defined as basically there is a problem, right? Maybe there's no water in a place. The area boy does nothing. Somebody comes and fixes that water problem, and then the area boy shows up and starts charging people for it. So this is the area boy economy in the sense that area boys cannot solve a problem, but once they see a solution, they show up to monetize it for themselves, right? So, which is the unfortunate reason why there are no public beaches in Lagos anymore. I mean,
On that point, quickly, you can see the contrast. I mean, you used to live in Lagos, you know the state of public beaches. When Landmark came and, built the complex and the structures along that coastline, you could see the difference between Landmark Beach and Oniru Beach that was public right beside it. You could see the clear difference, right? But I mean, what I want to push you on that point is how much of it do you think is part of the politics of Lagos generally?
a lot of it is.
I read this fantastic paper. It was on Latin America, and I think a little bit of that is going on in Lagos, like forbearance as governance. Because the argument you hear people when you talk about this area boy thing is that if you don't allow them to do that, then they become armed robbers, the crime is going to spike. So it's sort of become forbearance. Let's allow them to harass people and extract or collect some kind of informal taxation so that, we don't become unsafe generally.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, there's definitely a lot of forbearance going on, especially returned with Tinubu. So the military suppressed it, obviously, but then when Tinubu came back as governor of Lagos in 1999, there's a deal, right? So in the sense that, okay, these area boys, they are useful in election times, whatever, and then we allow them. I mean, another part of it, I was talking to somebody recently about it. There was a time when I was going to write a book about NURTW, just the whole model of it. But I mean, I abandoned it because I was just not comfortable with a lot of the stuff I was seeing in there. But basically, you had a guy in the 80s called BioSuccess, right? And this guy was the one who, the NURT model you have today, he was the one who actually established it in the sense that he, linked up with politicians and the whole idea of extracting revenues from motor parks. And one of the legacies of that, and there was somebody wrote a paper about it. Unfortunately, I can't find that paper anywhere anymore, but somebody wrote a paper about it that when you compare, especially in the Southwest, when you compare the amount of motor parks, it is way higher in Nigeria than you would expect compared to other countries. And the reason for this is because motor parks became a revenue generating opportunity, and individual warlords or strongmen, everyone was creating their own motor parks, and then you could just have, I mean, somebody was telling me recently that on Ikorodu Road, I haven't seen it, but on Ikorodu Road now, there's actually a motor park right in the middle of the road. Right? No, not in the side or anything, right in the middle of the road. And, when you think about it, you see motor parks everywhere in Lagos. And that's just because it's a nice little earner for someone, in the sense that if you control this motor park, revenues are guaranteed for you. And this is something that Lagos State tolerates. So there's no public transportation system. You have all this kind of motor parks business, right? And it is almost kind of like a quid pro quo. We let you do this stuff, and then when election time comes, you don't misbehave and you can be useful to us. So definitely, forbearance as governance is definitely a big part of it. And, again, it is why the whole area boy thing has metastasized into what it is today, whereby, I mean, unless you have maybe a completely new party in Lagos that comes to power and does not really owe that voting block anything, and then maybe he has an incentive to clamp down on the problem. Waste generation, there is something, there is a whole arrangement behind it, in the sense that, for example, when you had the whole waste management system in Lagos, where it was people pushing carts
Yeah,
to
yeah.
gather waste and all of that. There was a political
Omolanke.
arrangement. Yeah, there was a political arrangement behind it, because those people were paying money upwards, and everything is almost kind of like a forbearance where they tolerate something. So you have Lagos, they cannot really have a waste management system. So definitely, it's part of the political economy. So unfortunately, because of that, you can't have public spaces, right? So every beach now, for a beach to work, it just means that it has to be private, and then you keep out there. I mean, I remember when I was in Lagos last year, I went to Ilashe for the first time, and the beach is stunning, right? The beach is stunning. Like, it's, it is very clear water. The sand is very, very clean, and all of that. And there's nobody there. I mean, when I wrote my piece, the word on the streets, I put some pictures. Like, this is like, but again, how do you get there? You have to hire a boat to get there. And, the beach houses are all private type beach houses. So getting there requires a significant financial hurdle, which can keep out all the area boys and keep out any kind of random person. So that's just the way you can have a public space now, because of this whole political economy. That means that there's a lot of forbearance going on, allowing people to. So that cost is externalized to ordinary people who cannot escape it, unfortunately.
One other significant event in 2025 was the tax reform, obviously, and it generated a lot of destruction. Sorry, squash. I hope not destruction. Um, what are your thoughts generally? You're a bit of an expert on this subject than I am, even though you might have your views and preferences on taxation generally. But watching that whole episode unfold, what was going through your mind? I know we like caught up late with it on the blog, but I think we each done a piece, like doing a review. But now that it's been passed and the laws are operational, and we are constantly being reminded that there's no going back, and you can't even critique in peace. So
So I think so in general, so my view is that the initial tax bill and the way it was going to change the distribution of VAT, I thought that was a big deal, right? So, I mean, you look at the way Nigeria is going, right? VAT has steadily grown as a share of the distributable revenues of the country, right? So, and it is growing more. Oil has taken, less and less of a backseat and a lower and lower share. VAT is becoming the thing that is going to grow. So, however a tax bill agreed to structure the distribution of VAT was going to be a big deal, the collection and the distribution of VAT. So I thought the first proposal in that tax bill, in terms of how it kind of like shifted the incentives to say, the more you generate in VAT, the more you get, incentives and were aligned with actual revenues. I thought that was a good thing, right? Unfortunately, initial proposal obviously got killed quite quickly. It descended into all kinds of tribal and whatever and all this kind of thing. Anyway, and that the first version of that VAT reform was killed. Beyond that, I think everything else, to be honest, I'm not that moved by it. A lot of people talk about tax bill, whatever. I can't get excited over it. And I remember when the former head of the tax FIRS, Ifweko Okaru, and was it 2009 when she did her own tax changes? I remember I writing a piece about it, and then she called me. We had a conversation about that. And she explained, where she started from and where she finally landed, and I had a lot of sympathy for that, because she said, look, at the end of the day, politics is the art of the possible, right? What is actually possible compared to what you wanted, and she, she spoke a lot about how difficult that process was and how she had to make so many concessions just to get, quote unquote, carry along, which is a powerful thing in Nigerian political economy, the concept of carrying along, right? And in the process of carrying along people, you make so many concessions. So but my issue with the tax bill at the time is the same one I have now. Like, Nigeria's tax system is way too complex for the country. And if I'm to say, okay, maybe this looks like a tax system for a middle income to rich country. So maybe Nigeria is planning to get rich, and it has written a tax law for when it gets rich, maybe 10, 15 years time. That's the only way it makes sense to me. Because what is a country with 90-something% informal sector doing with a tax bill that has like 6 bands? All this stuff is just flying over people's head. It makes it is a small percentage of people that are impacted by all of this. Who cares about all that kind of stuff?
That's such a huge point. Go on, please. Go on.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, like, why do you have 6 different tax bands? Like, it makes no difference to the vast majority of people, and logic, or well, at least my logic would suggest that for the stage at which Nigeria is, the tax system should be much simpler, and then grow along with the people, the sophistication of the people. But all of this stuff, all this drama about the tax bill that you are writing for, 5% of the population, maybe if we're being generous, 10% of the population, I can't be bothered, really. I can't really work myself up over that. And for me, the fundamental point remains that Nigeria has a tax system that is so complicated, far too complex for the reality of the country. This is a tax bill that will make sense in Singapore. It will make sense in maybe even Thailand, where there's actual state capacity and all of that. But this is just people playing around with a small percent of the population, So, and then, like I wrote, I think in June last year, when I wrote the bill, I was quite surprised that actually there was a big tax cut in it. People are not thinking about it like that, but there's a tax cut in the sense that where the higher rate threshold has been set is so high that almost nobody outside Lagos will pay it. Maybe outside Lagos and Abuja will hit that tax threshold. Well, people have started saying their after tax income go up, so maybe they'll be happy about that. which is why you then saw that a lot of the whole tax debate descended to stuff around the narrative you should write when you're making transfers, because obviously for a lot of people, that was what would affect them. Everybody makes transfers. So all of a sudden, and then now you're getting all kinds of jokes about people writing is a gift, in the in the narrative, so that the FIRS or the NRS should not come and, take it out of that. So I think, for me, I couldn't get the whole noise and drama about it. I just refused to be too worked up about it. But, the main issue that I thought was quite interesting was when we then got to the whole controversy around alteration, gazettes approved, and then again, it's a similar problem, right? Sort of, in the sense that we were exposed to the complicated nature of, or the bureaucratic nature of lawmaking in Nigeria, in the sense that the way bills work in Nigeria is quite complex or bureaucratic, and it requires attention to detail, and it requires following a lot of process. So somebody brings the bill, it goes to the House and the Senate, they debate it separately, they make their own adjustments, and then pass those, and then the Senate and the House have a joint committee together, and then they harmonize all their differences. Again, this requires a lot of attention to detail and following process. And then they come up with a harmonized version of the bill, and then they send it to the president. The president is happy, or if he's not happy, he asks for alterations. And then those alterations now have to go back to the joint, of both houses. The president cannot just say, oh, I have issues with certain parts of it, and I'm not signing it, and they send it only to the Senate. And then the Senate try and works and fixes those parts without carrying the House along, that sort of thing. And then within that back and forth. So there are so many places where, you have to be careful and follow the process. And obviously, when you have, quote unquote, anyhowness, you can see the so many different points of failure that could have happened, And this is even before, forget about even corruption or, malign actors or anything. Even pack that aside. Just the normal process without corruption, incompetence has so many points where you can plug into this whole process. It could be between, the bill when it was sent to the House. It could be between when the House and the Senate passed their own. It could be during that joint committee period when they harmonized it. It could be when they sent it to the president. It could be when the president sent it back to them, and when they sent it back. That whole. So there's so many points of failure where, where anyhowness has taken hold, then it is almost guaranteed that you have something like this. And it made me go back and think that how many bills are like this that we've passed, and I raised this question with a few friends that, look, God knows how many things we've done like that. And people be like, oh yeah, that even the Petroleum Industry Act was like this. There were issues around. And I'm not surprised, in the sense that because you have this complicated process that requires a lot of focus, seriousness, and attention to detail, when you have somebody like the current Senate President Akpabio, who is a cavalier type of person, it is guaranteed that there will be mistakes, that we've definitely passed bills in the past. I'm pretty sure of it, where what the House and Senate harmonized ended up being not what was passed or what was gazetted, So, and then gazetting is another process again. It was interesting that Taiwo Oyedele came out and said that part of the problem was the government agency, I forget their name now, that gazettes bill, they had not had to do this kind of volume of stuff in a while, and so mistakes were made. So I'm just thinking to myself that, well, gazetting in the past has probably had mistakes, but we just sweep it under the carpet and just carry on. So again, you have a country like Nigeria where fundamentally it is not too much to ask the question that what is Nigeria doing with two houses of parliament, really? Really, what are we doing with it? We've just created work for ourselves, and so again, that's one serious point of failure where for people who where anyhowness has taken hold, then you are guaranteed all these kind of things happening. What are we doing with that? And then the whole gazetting, approval, assenting, signature, back and forth. This process needs to be properly codified and documented, and with the high rate of attrition that we have in the Senate. I mean, I forget the number now, but I think it was more than 50% of the Senate didn't return the last time or something. Every time we have a Senate election, whenever we have this National Assembly election, for example, it just means that, a lot of knowledge is lost because, people lose it. And then when maybe the majority of people in the National Assembly are in their first term are new, a lot of people don't know how to do things. They don't even know the process and all that. Do they train new legislators? Who knows? So I think it was a real commentary on the system more than the actual. For me, it was a commentary on the actual system and all the different points of failures that we have in a system that is so complicated that collides with institutional anyhowness in Nigeria.
For me, and I agree with you, for me, it was a mixture of both in the sense that, it's a commentary on how we do things. And I'll come to that point later. I mean, speaking, I want us to talk about Taiwo himself and how the whole process went. But even equally important for me is, I mean, when the reform guy was going around selling this thing, it was quite ambitious, to be honest. I think it was like one of the most ambitious bit of reform that Nigeria has done in the last 20 years or so. So, I mean, there were key claims like the tax reforms are pro-poor. And then you read the bill itself and you see the slippery slope kind of way it treats maybe something as simple as VAT, and the mixture of zero rating and exemptions, which in practice are not the same thing. So, I mean, you exempt things like food items, tuition, medical goods, baby products, yada, yada. But that's different from zero rating, right?
Yeah,
And if you say that the intent for that is pro-poor, we know from evidence that exemptions break the credit chain and they can embed VAT in prices. Which
they'll be captured by the
exactly.
the seller. The seller will
Exactly.
just
So
pocket it.
which at least partly offsets the consumer relief you're going for, generally. And then, things like, the personal income tax, saying it's progressive, blah, 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 0% up to 800,000, explicit exemption of minimum wage earners. But it goes back to your point on informality, right? Like, how many people are minimum wage earners in Nigeria? So, like, what does it really capture? And again, what are we doing with 5-6 bands of personal income tax? So it being pro poor, I guess time will tell. And then you say it's pro growth, and you look at arbitrary things like development levy. Nothing major was done on corporate income tax, at least to like shift the. So, and you still see that without improved efficiency, the near-term effective tax burdens on businesses and some of the risks of uncertainty around enforcement could still dampen investment. But the big thing for me, which I think the failure or success of the whole tax bill rests on, is the state capacity and how taxes are administered generally. And I think this is where I have the biggest issue with Taiwo, which is that there is so much emphasis on who is getting relief versus how exactly are we going to simplify the process by which we administer taxes generally. And I think I mentioned this in my piece because I did a brief evidence survey of how taxes work generally in developing countries. And the overwhelming evidence is that tax administration really matters more than rates.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I feel like there is very, very little emphasis on that in this whole reform thing. So it then brings me to the fact that we want to do tax reform. We created a committee or tax reform and fiscal policy. I forgot the full name. But maybe you've seen something that I haven't. Throughout this process, I didn't see a single study or survey or some kind of data gathering exercise authored by this committee or funded by the committee that really, really tell us what exactly are the numbers of income earning households in Nigeria and how these tax reforms are going to impact them. Like, it just feels like we are flying blind. And
I think a lot of the expertise was, or what's that thing they call it? Appeal to authority, or that sort of thing. So
so
it was deferred to Taiwo.
exactly.
Right, in the sense that, okay, here's a partner on tax, is the probably the most, and they just like, if he's talking about it, then he must surely know what he's talking about, or he must have the data. But yeah, but it's a really interesting point. I never saw any, I mean, there were no projections, for example, that okay, if we change the threshold to this thing, here are the current number of people who are paying this, and then here is what it will look like
exactly
over time.
And that worries me if that is how we did a major piece of policy reform. It worries me that everything just sort of rested in this single individual brain who had a lot of political leeway and authority to just, I mean, this is not a knock on him or whatever.
Yeah, it's just an interesting way of doing reform, and a big one like that, where it was so pretty much so personality driven.
Yeah. And again, to your point, like for a lot of, when you listen to him speak, for a lot of the projection that he was doing in terms of tax structure and preferences, you just feel like he's a bit on shaky grounds when it comes to how taxation actually works in developing contexts, as opposed to, like you said, making taxes for Singapore or France or whatever. So, like, we should be looking at countries like Indonesia and, and it's like the paradox of technocracy in Nigeria for me, because you might have people with lots of expertise, lots of knowledge, probably lots of experience, but who don't really grasp development in the sense that we talk and write about on the blog. And a lot of what they do sometimes and how they see things can feel out of context. So that felt very interesting to me and super weird, but I guess time will tell. This is all, revenue drive. And lastly, on that point, to your point, one of the biggest piece of, if you wake me up in the middle of the night and you say, what are the top 3 things that I think will change Nigeria? Top of my list will be abolishing presidential system of government, and with it, the bicameral legislature. Let's go back to the parliament, right? So, and this tax thing really exposed the ugly underbelly of having lawmakers who do not understand their mandate and even how the presidential system of government is supposed to work. So let's go international a bit because we have a few minutes left. When you look at Trump, we haven't really talked about this on the show. And I think the last time we did something on foreign policy was the very first episode with Judd. When you look at Trump and the whole MAGA phenomenon, what comes to you, especially this second coming, which it feels like a whole decade has been packed into a year. What comes to your mind? Like, it's just a very interesting person to me. Like, when I look at the Venezuela thing, I know for years it felt like internet conspiracy theory when people talk about Iraq and some of the wars that America has been involved in overseas, and people say, oh, it's for oil, it's for resource, it's for, and you try and argue to a point that, oh, no, it's not that simple. But here is the president of the United States basically saying the quiet part out loud. Like, I mean, I don't care. Human rights, whatever. I'm here for oil. I'm here for the money. So when you look at Trump, what really comes to your mind?
So I think the most interesting thing about this whole thing about Trump is, especially the second time, is how old school it all is. It all is. Like you said, if you read historical accounts, these are 19th century, 20th century stuff. Like basically, first of all, trying to expand, okay, there are resources here. Let's go there and get the resources. Like this is all old school type stuff. Human capital plays far more of a role in anything these days,
Yep. Yep.
And, but he's held these views for a very long time. Somebody, when the whole Venezuela thing happened, somebody, dug up some of his comments about Iraq. And he was saying at the time that, America did a stupid thing. Like we went to Iraq and we didn't even get the oil and all of that. But the reality is, look, some people at the time obviously wanted to go to Iraq for the oil, but here, what I ordered versus what I received was very, very different. Like oil is not an easy thing. It hardly ever materializes in the way you want. So you say, okay, we will go to Iraq and say, okay, we'll pay for this by 2 million barrels a day that we can get out of there. In reality, you don't get that. Different things happen. And the same thing with Venezuela now, where you can see that his thinking is very, very straightforward, right? We'll go there, we'll get the oil and all of that. But the oil people are the one actually pushing back. Typically, you might think that, oil companies will be jumping on it. But they're saying that, look, to ramp this thing up, first of all, there's a whole problem with the actual amount of reserves in Venezuela. This was something that Chavez and Maduro after him, inflated. When you look at the amount of reserves that everybody says Venezuela has, you start going back, tracing back to where is this number coming from? Eventually, you end up at a number that is from Chavez and Maduro, and is basically, trust me, bro, we have this thing in there, and those guys had an incentive to cook up, numbers and say Venezuela had all this. So, first of all, how much oil is there really in Venezuela? That much. Okay, there's a lot of oil there, but how much is it going to cost to get out of the ground? And would it be worth it? Especially at current prices, where oil prices are now stuck below $70 for a long time, and there's no chance of it. Look, if you go and bring an additional 1 million or 2 million barrels out of Venezuela, what does that do to prices? It crashes prices. Does it still make sense to? But, Trump is not, he's not thinking about all of this. He is a very old school guy, right? Finland has the second highest deposits of rare earths in the world. So we need to have it. There are resources there. We need to have it. Venezuela, there's oil in there. We need to have it. So all of this, I find it very, very interesting and funny. That is how old school the guy is. And look, he's an 80-year-old guy now. Chances of him changing his views are zero. Until he's out of office, this is what is going to happen. And I find it all interesting because I tell my friends that there is no bigger Maduro hater in the world than I am, right? I have disliked this guy for a very long time because, and I was radicalized even for that because I had a Venezuelan colleague at work a few years ago. And, when he told me the story of his family, right, the whole family had scattered across the world, right? So he was in the UK here. He had maybe a brother in Spain, another brother or sister in America. And they were all struggling to get their mom out of Venezuela. And the woman started from never. I'm an old woman. I am never leaving Venezuela. Now, why would I leave Venezuela? Why would I be emigrating at my age? And they watched how Maduro's crazy behavior basically broke her down until the woman emigrated in her 70s. So you can imagine what it took to emigrate. I think she went to join maybe his brother or sister in Spain. And when you look at it, on the day that Maduro took office in Venezuela, Venezuelans were 4 times, not 4%, 4 times richer than they are today. Right? So this is pure destruction, economic destruction that, that you cannot even imagine. Abacha did not do 10% of what the guy has done, right? 8 million people have left the country. So Colombia is the biggest host of refugees in the world. And this is, and bigger than Turkey, that is in a war zone with so many warring neighbors and all of that. And this is just purely Venezuelans who are leaving the countries as refugees and moving next door to Colombia. So the guy's destruction, what he did was, beyond wicked, right? And I was personally okay with Trump rattling his cage. My whole idea was that, look, that he will keep rattling the cage, bullying the guy, and then the guy will resign, and then there'll be some kind of arrangement, and just get him out of office and let somebody else try, and let Venezuelans begin to recover. And then you wake up in the morning and they've carried the guy. Like, and I'm thinking that, okay, we saw this with Noriega, and we thought that, okay, this was something, a while ago, and maybe this kind of tools are not something we use anymore. So again, the whole theme of the whole thing is really old school in the sense of the way he does things. Oh yeah, we're going to go somewhere because, we want the resources there, and we're going to be making so much noise about Greenland. Is Greenland really something that cannot be resolved by people getting in a room and discussing? Denmark, over the years, Denmark has put itself in a difficult situation because it does not want to be seen as an imperial power or a colonial power in Greenland.
Yeah.
That's not good for their image. So over the years, they've been given a lot of powers, quote unquote, back to the Greenlanders. But the reality is that Greenland is 9 times the size of the UK with 56,000 people, right? They cannot possibly defend that place. So it must be a client of a bigger power. That's just the reality of what it is. So Denmark has arranged this kind of fiction whereby, we're not a colonial power, we're not an imperial power, but, we'll continue to supply you, we'll continue to guarantee your security and all of that kind of stuff. And then Trump, rather than do this thing like an adult, if there surely is scope for an arrangement where Denmark transfers Greenland to the US. In fact, they don't even need to do the transfer. The US has access to the place. A few years ago, decades ago, the US had 20,000 soldiers in there. They can establish a base there if they want. How has this thing now exploded onto the scene whereby we must have it, we must collect it, we must annex it, it must become part of the US? In the reality of it, you don't need, this is so old school, whereby you can put a fiction on the whole thing, diplomacy, and say, okay, Denmark might say, oh, okay, right, nominally we still own the place, but now it's a US has enough use of all the, but the guy, I think he cannot be satisfied with something like that because as far as it's concerned, he wants to change the map of America. So we had the Louisiana Purchase, we had the New Mexico Purchase, and all those kind of things. So now we'll have the Greenland Purchase. And you just wonder that, this is all old school. Grabbing a Latin American Cordillo from his bed and taking him to the US, all that kind of stuff, going into places because of the oil or whatever. It's just so, I don't know. It's interesting to watch, I guess. Yeah.
So, looking at the guy, and I recall Tyler Cowen writing something during the first time when he was running against Hillary. And, he did this whole dichotomy about what kind of leader do you want to have, a liar or a hypocrite? And ultimately, he came down on the fact that at the end of the day, you want a hypocrite as your leader because there's just some things about governance that you don't want leaders to be thinking in black and white. Like, I want this, give it to me. I have power. I'm going to use it. You want someone that is adept in double speak, both in governance and also in public perception. But Trump is like completely opposite of that. But
remember, he's a social media president.
Yeah.
Right. So, which makes the whole thing even more interesting because look, at the end of the day, right, governance is a bit messy, right? There are things that, frankly, if you ask me, should not be made public. There are parts of diplomacy that, because just putting it public is just something that the public would never really understand or fully grasp. And look, I'm happy for there to be an industry of investigators and FOI people who maybe years later, dig up what actually happened and write a book about it, and then we get to know about it and all of that. That's fine. But in the moment of making decisions, especially when it comes to diplomacy and different countries working together, maybe there's probably scope for some 10% of stuff really not to be for public consumption, at least at the time when it's happening. But Trump, a thought comes into his head, it's on Truth Social, right? A thought comes to his head, he puts it on Twitter, he says it out loud and all of that. And well, again, that was how he made his name anyway, and that was how he became president. So I guess that's where things are at the moment.
So, I mean, let's talk about the long-term implications of MAGA politics generally, which is something that, I find worrying a bit. Trump is Trump, and I mean, barring some kind of sweeping change, he only has 4 more years, 3 now, to serve as the U.S. president. But unlike in the first time where you had people like John Kerry, you had people like Rex Tillerson, who could ignore, some of the worst instincts. I think the lesson has been learned this time around. And first, there was the complete destruction of the bureaucracy with the Doge thing. And you just have an army of enablers who you want to believe that they seriously believe some of these things that comes out of their mouth, like J.D. Vance, like Stephen Miller, and this whole white nationalist politics. When you look at all of that, so someone posted a quote from the film The Good Shepherd, which I think actually captures the way people think of MAGA politics now. So there was this scene with Matt Damon and what's this Goodfellas guy? Joe Pesci, right? And I mean, Joe Pesci was asking Damon's character that the Italians, we have the church, we have the family, the Irish, they have their country, even the blacks, they have their music. That what do you people have? And the Matt Damon character replied that America, that's what we have. The rest of you are just visiting. All right. So because it feels like if some people in the MAGA base have their way, 30% of the US population will be deported eventually. And just when you look at such things, how do you, especially given the way the social media works, Elon Musk is now interfering in UK affairs and European affairs for some reason. He's offering to sponsor politicians across the European continent with aligning views, especially for you as also a British citizen and also an immigrant. When you look at these things, where does it sit with you?
Well, it's interesting, I guess, in the sense that, obviously something has shifted, right? So, where immigration is now is not where it was 10 years ago, right? So, I mean, immigration will always be something that will rub some people. I mean, there is a percentage of the population who will never like it, life goes on, regardless of all of that. But what's happened, I think, lately is there's been a shift in the sense that, and I remember reading a WSJ piece a couple of years ago, maybe just a year or two after the pandemic, and it spoke about how the level of immigration to Western countries was at by far the highest level ever in history, even exceeding previous periods in America. And I just thought to myself, I remember reading at the time, I thought to myself, where is this going to land, right? But I guess we found out now. The difference is that immigration has become really visible, and I'll be frank with you, and I'll say I see it, right? So you can see, I hear Yoruba in places now in the UK, in places where I never used to hear Yoruba before, right? So it became visible. Now the issue is, and I remember Ross Douthat, he was saying something one time about how when you get to a period of low birth rates, which you have in a lot of Western countries now, when the birth rate is low, see, they notice immigration a lot more. So, for example, when birth rates are low, you are a woman who has just maybe one child, right? Or you only had one child. Now, the chances of your own child never having a child is quite high, in the sense that so you're a mother, you gave birth to one daughter, the daughter never got married or something, or even when maybe she got married, she refused to have children. So, that's the end of your line, sort of, kind of. So in that scenario, people begin to notice immigration a lot more. And I think this is an under discussed point, in the sense that, low birth rates of the native population actually makes them a lot more sensitive to immigration levels in there. So I guess it was going to, you could probably say, okay, maybe this was going to happen. It was going to, there was going to be some kind of backlash. But be that as it may, the level of the backlash, especially in America, has been, well, maybe not the backlash, but probably kind of like been surprising, or maybe I wasn't paying attention enough, in the sense that, without a doubt, a lot of Americans are still in support of immigration enforcement, even the way, maybe when you ask them about killings, for example, they might say, oh, they don't like it, but actually removing people they like, and they're okay with it, because, the southern border, those pictures that people were seeing of just people pretty much almost making it like a free for all, it really radicalized people. And I think, you mentioned Tyler Cohen earlier. He made a post a couple of days ago, I think, and when he talked about, he said, look, if you support immigration, stop talking about it. And I thought that was actually a really smart point, in the sense that there is just no upside about talking about immigration right now.
At least in
Right.
the
Even
current
if you
climate, yeah.
Exactly. Even if you are an immigration supporter, just don't talk about it. Just let this fever wash over, all of that, in the sense that, okay, you put in, Trump has dealt with the southern border issue quite effectively. Over a matter of time, people are going to be seeing less people crossing over. There are not that many images of people seeing a whole caravan or whatever they used to call it at the time. Maybe that becomes the new normal over 5 years, then we'll see where we land. In the sense that I don't expect that this will be a permanent heightened state of affairs where, I think where we are now, people don't really know how to do middle ground in anything. So things went too far in one direction previously. The solution, quote unquote, is to go in the extreme opposite of that time. So I guess, this is the wet dream of people like Stephen Miller, in the sense that who have always wanted this kind of, who have always felt that immigration levels were way too high and all of that. So, the last 4 years before Trump kind of like gave them a pass, which was a big part of how Trump won the election,
Yeah.
immigration were quite very, very high levels. And even in the UK as well, like you say, in here we are having reforms polling is tied very strongly to immigration. Immigration goes up, reforms polling goes up, But now, a lot of it has been tightened. A lot of immigration has been tightened. It's a lot more difficult now, So we'll see where we land at the end of this parliament over the next 3 years, where maybe immigration becomes less salient, or it takes a backseat to stuff like energy, which is really becoming a big issue. Cost of electricity, cost of gas, all this kind of stuff, or the economy in general, the cost of living, which are obviously linked. So if that takes a backseat, then we'll see how reform do. Like I said, if it stops being that visible to people, again, you look at it now, right? The small boats issue in the UK was a big issue, in
Yeah.
the sense that these small boats were, if you go to that area in Kent where these boats land, it literally, people live there by the coast. So you can look through your window and just see random people coming on the boat and landing, and then the police just take them and they were going. And then obviously you then had the whole hotels problem and all of that. So these were very, very visceral things for people to see that, you live in a small town, all of a sudden the hotel is packed full of people awaiting asylum, decision and claims. So it made the problem kind of like really visible. In the UK, it's quite interesting that part of it was actually a Brexit thing.
Yeah.
So when we were in the EU, a truck would drive from Eastern Europe, part of Eastern Europe that was in the EU, drive all the way across to the UK, and there are no checks, really. So, everyone knew. people were coming on these trucks that were bringing in goods. They were hiding in the back of this truck. But look, we were not stopping. I mean, part of being in the custom union, we're not stopping trucks. So once you've done a check, so let's say you come in at the border where, I don't know, where's the edge of the EU? Say Romania is at the edge of EU. If you enter the EU, you get checked at that point, and then you can drive all the way through without being checked again. Everyone knew. Now and again, there will be a scandal. So, for example, there was a scandal some years before we left the custom union where a truck, was stopped, and then they found so many dead. I think it was about 20 Vietnamese people. So who had been in the back of that truck, and maybe the driver had not stopped to give them fresh air or something. It was in the summer period, and they died. They died of in that. But so those things were happening. 99% of them wouldn't die in that way. Leaving the EU and leaving the custom union meant that we now had a border. So now trucks needed to be checked when they were coming into the UK. And because of that, that then made that whole immigration, quote unquote, part non-viable. So that pushed the problem to this small boats issue. And so you had a situation whereby the problem was there, but it was not visible. And then the same problem became visible. And a lot of things in politics are about what is visible and what is not visible. People start seeing these small boats, thousands of people coming on a day. It becomes a serious political problem. Now, obviously, it has gone down because nobody crosses in the winter, But again, by next summer, once the weather gets better, and then this thing starts to happen again, if the government does not deal with it, maybe reforms numbers will start going up again in the polls again. So, a lot of this stuff is ebb and flow. We've had, I mean, we'll see where this leaves us in a few years.
I mean, it's an interesting point, especially the point you mentioned regarding what Tyler was saying. And part of the things that I worry about is how some of these things, yes, it ebbs and flows, like you said, but maybe may have somehow altered politics for a long time to come.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know, maybe it's just part of the moral realism that is eventually catching up with Western civilization and its manifestation in politics. So I followed tennis a lot, and of course, typical media behavior. A lot of the American players currently playing at the Australia Open are getting questioned on politics a lot at their press conferences. And the answer has been varied. But one answer that really struck out to me was the male player Taylor Fritz, who said something along the lines of, "No matter what I say, it will be taken out of context, and so it's better not to say anything at all."
I prefer not to speak.
Yeah. So what I found interesting about it is that I don't think I will ever dream of a day where an American will feel like they no longer have freedom of speech. That it will
Americans
be
like to talk. Yeah.
That it will be implied that I'm not free to speak. So it's very, very interesting how American politics has been changing. It's been very interesting for me to see Americans tweet about ICE the way Nigerians were tweeting about SARS 5-6 years ago, right? There's just this sense of powerlessness and utter disbelief that this could be happening in 2020, whatever. That to close out this episode, let's talk briefly about Carney's speech at Davos. I don't know if you've seen the full thing.
I didn't see the full thing, but I mean, I've sort of read the bulk of it. It was definitely a good speech, and it's something that we've kind of missed on the global stage, where Obama used to give us these bangers, every now and again back then. And Obama's speech was an event, especially in his first campaign.
Yeah.
He will always. I can never forget the Reverend Jeremiah Wright's episode where he was in trouble with this guy, and it almost kind of felt like this thing might derail his campaign, and then he just came out with this speech that just closed out the whole thing. He was speeches were a big deal. So we've missed that kind of gravitas on the world stage where somebody actually channels the moment and says it. As for the actual substance of the speech and what it might imply, I don't know. I think the jury is still out on that in the sense that, look, if Kanye is talking about the international order as some kind of fiction, Canada got rich under this. Canada got rich under this international order. What is he saying? Is he saying that this thing that made Canada rich is, I don't know. A speech is a speech, right? And I tell my friends sometimes that, look, one of the effects that Trump has had on politics is that the reaction to him is for people to constantly be looking for heroes, the anti-Trump hero, which inevitably ends in disappointment. Angela Merkel was the leader of the free world initially at one point, and look, I doubt anybody's going to ask Merkel for her opinion or anything right now. The Germans are so angry at her, whatever, so we are constantly looking for an anti-Trump hero just because Trump is so dominant. He sucks out the oxygen from the public space, from the discussion and everything. So everyone actually constantly wants somebody to stand up to Trump, to be the alternative to Trump, to that kind of thing. So maybe it's Kanye's time. Well, we'll see how it goes. A lot of the stuff he's probably the best to do it in certain ways, in the sense that whatever America says, right? They can say whatever they like. Trump can say whatever he like. America would defend Canada, right? So Canada is literally on their border. They cannot, they would defend Canada if Canada got into trouble. So in that sense, Kanye has the liberty to be able to speak up in a way that, a European might not be able to do, right? Fine. Obviously, the tariffs are hitting them hard, but fundamentally, their security would never be under threat with America. America would not say, for example, say Russia was attacking Canada and just say, well, go ahead. I thought you said you wanted to go on your own. Well, sit down. Well, go ahead and do it. No, you can't, Canada's security is America's security. So in that sense, Kanye can use that leverage or that liberty to speak up, So again, at the end of the day, if you question the international order, it's all well and good. International rules bill is all well and good, and say, middle powers must come together, and all of that. It's all well and good. But then if you end up in a warmer embrace with China or something, then you've substituted one for the other, and they are different things. Again, it's their right. It's their choice to do. They can, but it's just a question of saying, what is the substance? What is the thing you're actually saying, and what is the actual reality of what you're saying? Again, early days, we'll see. We'll see where all these things take us. But, like I said, people want an anti-Trump hero, an anti-Trump person, because it's just kind of like a natural reaction to the guy who is so, it dominates the discussion on everything. So you want an anti, which I can sort of understand. So maybe it's Kanye. And, like I said, of all the people available in the world today, he's still relatively fresh. He still has some relative popularity in Canada. He's good looking. He can speak well. So, of all the people who can probably, are you going to tell the Japanese prime minister to do this? Everybody is fighting one war. Keir Starmer has gone from winning a landslide election to being the most unpopular prime minister in UK history since records began. He has issues at home. He's fighting even people within his own party who want to topple him. Emmanuel Macron is a French president in name only. He can barely pass a budget. He's fed up of the job. The French people are fed up of him, but they are stuck in this love-led marriage. Who is the Chancellor of Germany? Most people can't even name him, at the end of the day. So, so all the other G7 leaders who could have stood up, they are all battling one issue or the other. So so the job is for Kanye to do. I guess. So
that's so mean. You guys, you Europeans, you are mean.
Right? Who is the Prime Minister of Netherlands right now? I think it was.
I have no idea.
Can't tell you. Exactly. So,
I have no idea.
So there you go.
Yeah, I have no idea. But I mean, what I found interesting, because I mean, I've seen a lot of reaction to the speech, and of course, it was a great speech. I liked it, and I mean, naturally, reactions will be different, right? And a lot of people have misread, in my opinion. Like, I don't think it was announcing the end of the international order. I think it's just saying that, yeah, maybe from now on it will proceed by new rules, not the ones that we've largely operated with in the last 40, 50 years. But what is of interest to me is, where is Nigeria and Africa in this whole, whether real or imagined in the long term, in this reorganization of the global order, so to speak, where alignments are changing, coalitions are changing, people are trying to find new options to not leave themselves exposed, or to borrow Kani's phrase of strategic autonomy. Where does that leave Africa, and in this case, Nigeria?
My answer to that would be simply that it would be self-deceit to say, oh, we are not taking sides, we're playing. I think there's a choice to make, right? I don't think that there is anything like the quote unquote non-aligned movements where we had in the past. In reality, non-aligned movement was aligned actually when you look at what actually happened. So I guess for a country like Nigeria, a choice needs to be made. It's not going to be easy to say you are balancing both sides. And if you are going to actually even do that, it needs a lot of serious investment in diplomatic skill, right? You can't do the kind of thing Nigeria did where for 10 years Nigeria had pretty much no diplomatic representation in Washington. And then all of a sudden, when this whole issue of Christians being killed in Nigeria blew up into the open, it caught Nigeria by surprise because we had not done any kind of lobbying work. So if you actually say that we don't want to pick sides, we want to, we want to take opportunities from both, then you have to do some serious investment in diplomacy and diplomatic skills, in the sense that to avoid not being caught up or being just being on the receiving end of whatever happens. Otherwise, just pick a side. If you want to be on the US side, pick that. If you want to be on the go deeper into the Chinese embrace, pick that. But there is no aloof standing. There is no just chilling and just letting things go anyhow they like, and all of that. So I don't see how that is going to happen. So I think, the key thing for me will be that for countries like Nigeria, the key thing to be done is that we will need to invest seriously in diplomatic skills and understand that if you want to straddle East and West, it is not going to be easy at all. Don't be fooled that, we'll just not do anything and then we can benefit from the China and benefit from the US. It's not going to work that way, right? If that's what you want to do, if you want to straddle East and West, then you have to put in the serious investment in training diplomats, training, funding diplomacy, funding lobbying. You don't be reactive and say, wait for several US congressmen to start talking about killing Christians before you now realize that actually maybe we should hire a lobbying firm in Washington to push Nigeria's interest and then scramble together $9 million. It would have been cheaper, than $9 million if you did it 10 years ago, or just having an ambassador in Washington, somebody who is on the ball.
Or not leaving the foreign service so incompetent and
exactly.
hollow.
No, don't hollow things out and leave things out, and then you now start scrambling at the end. If we are in a new world where the old geopolitical order has ruptured, and you feel that Nigeria's strategic interests are best served by not alienating either side and carefully straddling both of them, then you have to put in the investment. Otherwise, the easy option is, like I said, pick a side. If you want to be in the Chinese orbit, go in there.
I saw a clip of the finance minister at the same Davos, and basically for him, and I don't know if that's the general government thinking in general. So it's still based on this resource politics. So we have a lot of critical minerals. We have a lot
The
of
vice
lithium
president too
in the
was saying
you
stuff like
know,
that.
and they need us. So eventually, that sort of protects us from the craziness, because they will always come to us and make a deal or do a transaction because we have
Delulu as Gen Z call it.
because we have minerals, and it just feels so. And I caught a bit of the vice president's session as well. Maybe we'll close on this point. What is it about development and our psyche that really does not value people? I recall when we started this conversation, and I think around the time we were discussing Trump and Venezuela, where you sort of made the point that human capital sort of drives this thing. And I have the same pushback against the slavery and resource theory of the Industrial Revolution, right? Can't exploit your way to TFP growth, is how I would put it.
Yep.
So, but the people, our vice president was saying that Nigeria land is so blah, blah, blah. If you plant cash, it will grow.
Embarrassing
And
stuff.
in the same breath, he was talking about how much we have struggled with agricultural productivity.
And he cannot
he
see.
just could not make the connection that it's a knowledge problem.
Yeah, exactly.
So what is it about the way we see development that our people, investing in people, is not really the front and center of the way we look at things? So it's all about, we have this, we have land, we can do agric. We have, despite the fact that Netherlands that does not have land is basically feeding the world. We have oil. So we have this, we have that. What is it about our psyche that has, you're the historian here. What has damaged us to the point where we don't see people as brains? We see them as just mouths.
Yeah, it's difficult to know the origin story of this problem. Well, obviously, we know it's there, right? It's been there for a long time, right? If you are, for example, willing to export slaves by the millions and in their, just capture, like no value add, just, that is a story of a place where human capital was not really seen as anything beyond the fact that the labor you could get out of it, So it's obviously been a problem out of that. And, I saw that video of Shetima as well, and I shared it in a group, and I was like, look, notice what he doesn't say in this thing. And I was like, look, an example I always tell people is, right? Imagine a mobile phone, right? Everything from a materials point of view, everything to make that mobile phone was around in the time of my grandfather. And yet my grandfather never used a mobile phone. So whatever mineral or whatever resource, whether it's metal, whether it's glass, whether it's cobalt, whether it's whatever it is that is inside a mobile phone today was around. It was on the ground there. When my grandfather was alive, God knows how long. But he never got to use a mobile phone. What is the difference between then and now? The minerals are there in the ground. It is knowledge. Because at that time, people just did not have the knowledge to dig out whatever it was in the ground, turn it into a mobile phone and make all of that. So, and it's the same thing now. There's probably some stuff in the ground. Lithium, people are blowing up the environment in Nigeria now in the name of lithium, but the lithium has always been there. All of a sudden, the knowledge has reached the point whereby we can now use this stuff for electric cars or whatever. And then all of a sudden you think that thing becomes, so when the vice president is saying stuff like that, I'm just thinking, this guy doesn't, he doesn't really understand or make the connection between what is there. The resources are available. They will always be available. But the critical constraint is the knowledge. And that knowledge is from the human capital in there. So why this problem has been with us for so long, I have no idea. I don't know where the origin is, but like I always, like the point I always make whenever I'm talking about formation is that, look, nobody ever caught a slave somewhere in Nigeria and say, oh, okay, I'll give him a bath. I'll give him a good haircut. I'll cream his body and everything. I'll make him look good, maybe give him makeup, give him a nice clothes and put jewelry on him so that I can increase the value I'm selling him at. That never happened, right? You capture the slave, you carry him to the coast and you sell. Somebody exchanged Bishop Ajayi Crowther for a horse, right? At the point, that person made a calculation and thought that, this horse is more valuable to me than this random Crowder. And Crowder went on to become one of the greatest ever Nigerians. The only difference was that he left Nigeria, he went to Freetown, got an education, came back, and that was it.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
The person who sold it for a horse at that time just never thought it was anything beyond whatever it was. So,
And
which is why
that person is forgotten today, completely
exactly.
erased.
I mean, yeah, which is why I always, I always use that Saru story. That is a really good story for us to always remember that people who were slaves, the lowest of the low, bottom of society, were rescued on the Atlantic, carried to Freetown. The only thing they got there was education, and they came back and they turned into something else. This is the best human capital story that we need to constantly remind ourselves of. And it's not about what is in the ground. It's not, I mean, the whole idea that which soil? What soil are you talking about in Nigeria? Is it better than the soil in Argentina? In Argentina, you can use your hand. In some place, the soil is so good, you can use your hand, just scrape the ground, plant something in, and it will grow very, very well. So what soil are you talking about in Nigeria where you still need fertilizer and all that kind of stuff to do? And you think that that's enough for you to carry a country of 200 million people, So I don't know. I don't know how we can only just keep making the case, keep reminding people of what this thing is about and say, which is why I always say now that my prayer is that nobody discovers any nonsense mineral or natural resource that causes another boom again in Nigeria. Oil is on its way out. Let it continue going slowly. But I don't want to hear another thing about something is the new oil. And unfortunately, Nigeria has that thing. And then that just becomes the target and everything. Maybe when we get to the point whereby, look, we realize that, okay, this thing cannot be about natural resources. It cannot be about, people will talk about maybe Nigeria has rare earths. Which rare earths? Everywhere you go in the world, if you dig, you find rare earths there. The issue, the difference in rare is density. Because you dig up the soil, 9.9% of what you dig up is useless. The rare earth is just a very, very tiny amount. So is that density you need? So I just hope that we don't discover any kind of new, quote unquote, new oil again. And then we can, figure out maybe the penny will drop and say, you know what? Okay, there's nothing in the ground that's going to come and save us. So maybe we need to really think hard about how we improve education and how we develop our human capital.
I think that would be a good note to close this conversation. And I mean, it's been fun doing this with you always.
Yeah, same here.
And yeah, we'll catch up sometime again soon.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for listening, everyone. I hope you had, I guess it was a bit rambling there, but hopefully we made something. If you listen to the end, I congratulate you and thank you. So we'll see you again soon.
I really do. I do. All right, Faye. Thanks.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.